The sun had barely begun to rise when Aisha unlocked the wooden door of her small flower shop. The early morning air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of the rain that had fallen during the night. She stepped inside and switched on the lights, filling the little shop with a soft, golden glow. The shelves were lined with vases of roses, lilies, tulips, and orchids, all still sleeping, their petals closed as if protecting their fragile hearts from the chill of dawn. Aisha took a deep breath and smiled faintly. This place was her world, her quiet corner where she still believed beauty could survive, even in a world that often forgot it existed. Her hands were rough and dry from years of work, but they moved gently as she began trimming stems and changing the water in the vases. She hummed under her breath, a soft tune her mother used to sing when they planted flowers together in their village garden. Those were simpler days, days filled with laughter and sunlight, before life became a storm she had to face alone. When Aisha's husband died suddenly 3 years ago, her world had collapsed. The dreams they built together, owning a small business, growing old side by side, saving enough to travel one day, all vanished in a single night. For months, she couldn't get out of bed. Friends stopped visiting, and her savings melted away faster than she imagined. People told her to move on, to find real work, something stable, something practical. But she couldn't. Something deep within her refused to let go of what she loved most, flowers. So she sold her jewelry, borrowed a little from her cousin, and rented this small shop at the corner of Market Street. It wasn't much, cracked walls, squeaky floors, and a faded sign that once read "Blooming Days," but to her, it was a beginning. Every morning since then, she had woken up before dawn, walked through the quiet streets with a basket of fresh flowers from the supplier, and opened the door to her tiny kingdom. But lately, even that hope had begun to fade. The city had changed. People rushed past her shop without looking, their eyes fixed on their phones, their faces tired and gray. Fewer customers came in. Bouquets that once sold out by noon now stayed untouched until evening. Some days, she had to throw away wilted flowers that never found a home. Each petal that fell felt like a piece of her spirit drying up. As she arranged lilies that morning, her mind drifted to the unpaid rent, the electric bill on the counter, and the ache in her back that never went away. She wondered how long she could keep pretending that everything was fine. Maybe the others were right, maybe flowers couldn't feed a life, only decorate it for a moment. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, maybe it's time to stop. Just then, the soft tinkle of the doorbell broke her thoughts. Aisha looked up. An elderly man stepped inside, moving slowly, his posture heavy with grief. He wore an old brown coat, buttoned unevenly, and his eyes were swollen as if he hadn't slept. He held his hat in both hands and approached the counter without saying a word. "Good morning, sir," Aisha greeted gently. "How can I help you today?" He hesitated before answering, his voice trembling. "It's my wife's birthday today," he said quietly. "She passed away last year. I visit her grave every week, but today, I wanted to bring her something special. Something she would have loved." Aisha felt her chest tighten. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said softly. "She must have loved flowers." The man nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "She loved roses. Pink ones. Said they reminded her of the spring we met." Aisha smiled faintly and turned to her workbench. "Then let's make something beautiful for her," she whispered. Her hands moved with a care she hadn't felt in weeks. She selected the freshest pink roses, soft, delicate, and still carrying dew on their petals. She added white lilies for purity, a few lavender stems for peace, and a single yellow tulip for remembrance. As she tied the ribbon, her mind wandered to her own husband, his laughter, the way he used to bring her wildflowers from the roadside, saying they were poor man's roses. The memory stung, but it also warmed her heart. When she finished, she turned to the man. "Here," she said, handing him the bouquet. "I hope she'll like these." He took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. His trembling fingers brushed the petals. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a low, shaky voice, he murmured, "These flowers, they look alive. Like they're still growing." Aisha smiled. "That's because I believe every flower deserves to bloom," she said quietly. "Even after it's been cut." The man looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a small smile, the kind that came from remembering something precious. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've given me more than flowers today." After he left, the little bell above the door rang again, and silence returned to the shop. Aisha stood for a while, watching the sunlight stream through the dusty window, touching the petals with golden warmth. She thought about the man's words. They look alive, like they're still growing. She turned to the rows of flowers, some blooming, some wilting, and suddenly saw them differently. They weren't just plants, they were fighters. Every bloom was a small miracle, a reminder that beauty could still exist after storms, after loss, after everything had fallen apart. Aisha picked up a fallen petal and held it in her palm. Maybe I'm not done blooming either, she whispered to herself. She opened the window, letting in a soft breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and morning sun. Outside, the city buzzed with noise and movement, but for the first time in a long while, Aisha didn't feel small against it. She felt like she belonged, like the little flower shop still had a place in this rushing world. And as she began preparing another bouquet, her hands steadier now, her heart whispered what her lips didn't need to say aloud. Never stop blooming. Months passed, and the little flower shop on the corner of Market Street began to change. Not overnight, but slowly, like a seed finding its way through hard soil. Aisha noticed it first in the light. The mornings seemed brighter now, the sunlight spilling through the windows and dancing on the petals like gold dust. The air smelled fresher, the flowers livelier, as if they sensed her renewed spirit. For the first time in years, she didn't dread unlocking the door. She looked forward to it. One late afternoon, as she rearranged tulips near the window, a voice broke her concentration. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a timid girl, no older than 15. She wore a faded school uniform and carried a torn backpack. "Are you hiring anyone? Even part-time? I can work after school." Aisha turned to her. The girl's eyes were nervous but hopeful, the same kind of hope Aisha had once seen in her own reflection. She smiled. "I can't pay much," she admitted honestly. "But if you're willing to learn, I could use an extra pair of hands." The girl's face lit up. "Really? I'll work hard, I promise." Her name was Mina. From that day, she became Aisha's little helper, and, slowly, something more. She was clumsy at first, cutting stems too short or spilling water, but she had a gentle touch that customers loved. Aisha taught her how to pair colors, how to trim roses without damaging their bloom, and how to speak to each person who walked through the door with kindness, no matter how hurried or silent they seemed. As they worked side by side, the shop began to feel alive again. They laughed over silly mistakes, shared tea during quiet hours, and stayed late decorating the shelves. Mina's youth filled the shop with energy, and Aisha's wisdom grounded it. Together, they made a perfect balance, like roots and blossoms feeding each other's growth. One evening, after closing, Aisha painted a new sign to hang above the door. The old one had faded long ago, its letters barely visible. She dipped her brush into bright green paint and carefully wrote the words that had come to define her journey. "Never stop blooming." When the paint dried, she hung it above the window. The next morning, sunlight hit the sign, and the words glowed softly in the golden light. Mina read them aloud, smiling. "That's beautiful. What does it mean?" Aisha looked at her and said, "It means life won't always be easy. Sometimes it will cut you down. But even then, you can choose to grow again. Flowers don't bloom because the soil is perfect, they bloom because they try." Those words stayed with Mina. She repeated them whenever customers asked about the sign, and soon, people began to notice. They didn't just come to buy flowers anymore, they came to feel something. Some came after losing a loved one, some after failing at something important, and others just to sit for a while among the flowers and breathe in peace. One day, a woman walked in holding a camera and a notepad. "I'm a journalist," she said with a friendly smile. "I'm writing about small businesses that survived difficult times. Someone told me about your shop." Aisha was surprised. "My shop? Oh, it's nothing special." The journalist laughed. "From what I hear, it's very special. May I ask, how did you manage to keep going when others couldn't?" Aisha thought for a moment, looking around at the rows of blooms, the roses, the daisies, the lavender swaying gently in the soft wind. Her eyes rested on the sign above the window. Then she said quietly, "Because I refused to stop blooming. Life tried to break me, but I decided to grow anyway. Not the same as before, maybe slower, maybe smaller, but still growing. That's all that matters." The journalist smiled, clearly moved. That's a beautiful answer. Thank you, Aisha. A week later, Aisha's story appeared in a local magazine under the title, "The Woman Who Never Stopped Blooming." The article told of her struggles, her loss, and her resilience. It showed a picture of her standing proudly in front of her shop, surrounded by flowers. After the story was published, everything changed. People began coming from different parts of the city, some to buy flowers, others just to meet the woman who had inspired them. They brought their own stories, stories of heartbreak, of failure, of recovery. They told her how they'd read her words and found courage again. One man said, "I lost my job last year and was ready to give up. But your story reminded me that life still has seasons. Maybe my spring will come again." Another woman whispered, tears in her eyes, "When I read about you, I realized I could start over too." Aisha never knew what to say. She simply handed them flowers, sometimes roses, sometimes daisies, and said softly, "Keep blooming." The shop became more than just a business. It became a place of healing. Children came in after school to learn from Mina. Lonely people found comfort in the fragrance of fresh blooms. Strangers became regulars, friends became family. The walls of that little shop seemed to hold laughter, tears, and whispered prayers all at once. One quiet evening, after the customers had gone and the street outside grew still, Aisha stood by the window. The golden light of sunset poured across the floor, touching the flowers and the hand-painted sign. She ran her fingers gently over the words, "Never stop blooming," and felt something warm rise in her chest. She thought of her husband, of the long nights she spent crying, of the mornings when she almost gave up. She thought of the old man who came for his wife's grave, of Mina's bright laughter, of all the strangers who had turned into companions in her little corner of the world. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was gratitude, for every storm that had forced her to grow roots deeper than before. She whispered into the still air, "No matter what happens, I'll never stop blooming." Mina, who was sweeping nearby, looked up and smiled. "What did you say, ma'am?" Aisha turned toward her with a soft smile. "Just reminding myself of something important." They finished cleaning together, locking up the shop as the last rays of light faded into twilight. Outside, the sign caught a glimmer of moonlight, its message glowing faintly against the night sky. As Aisha walked home, the scent of flowers followed her, roses, lilies, jasmine, blending into the evening air. Life hadn't given her everything she wanted, but it had given her something better, the strength to keep growing. And in that moment, she understood what the flowers had been trying to tell her all along. Even after the harshest winters, spring always finds its way back.